it's still a place for voices that are not mainstream, for people who do not have money to be a part of a medium, who maybe don't have the education but are brilliant on the air. It's still an opportunity for people to do that. Um, I still believe in it. I think it's still valid and important and an opportunity for a lot of people to offer this kind of expression, whether it's political content or music or uh, just talking about how we live our lives. And new ideas can bubble there. And of course, in the early days, a lot of people started in community or college radio and ended up on NPR.
Hmm.
So it's also a a training ground for new voices and new talents for larger scale media. It's efficient, you know. Everyone puts a little bit in, and you can run this big operation year after year after year, as of course KGNU has done.
This is Inspiring Women, and I'm Laurie McGraw. And today we're doing a special conversation. We're at the KGNU studio, and we thought it would be great to speak with some of the inspiring women of community radio. And I am delighted to be speaking with Marty Durlin today. Marty, thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, let's just dive into it. So, Marty, how long have you been in the space of community radio?
Well, I started in 1972, so 52 years,
So,
on
so,
and
so
off.
your background says pioneer. You are a
Yes,
pioneer.
that's what it says. Yeah, I started at KCFR when it was KCFR in Denver before it became Colorado Public Radio and covered the state. And at that time, it was a small community station. And that was my first experience. I was there for 3 years as a volunteer. And I briefly also worked there as the quote traffic manager. And, I went to the NPR, some of the early NPR conferences in Washington, and man, that was the beginning of it.
Well, it's been a long time. What drew you to it? What drew you to it? And then what kept you there all of these years?
Well, as a child, I wanted to be a writer. And so I was always expressing myself in some way. I wrote poetry and short stories and songs, and that's something that's a through line in all through my life. Also plays, where I cast my cousins and neighbors and that kind of thing. And I had just had a child, my older daughter, who ended up doing community radio as well. Allie Lightfoot was a baby. She was born in 71, and I was sitting at home with the baby, and my husband was out working at a tedious job, and I just wanted to talk to somebody. I wanted to express myself, and I started listening to commercial talk radio, and I tried to get a job with them, and they basically weren't interested in me for any reason whatsoever. And I also, well, that's a different story. I was also turned down other places. Anyway, uh, so I ended up going to the KCFR studio, which was right around the University of Denver where I was living. And, you know, I walked in the door and said, I want to do something. And they were like, welcome. Hey, come on in and let's have fun. Let's do it. So it gave me an entree. I just wanted to express myself and have it be a circle, have you can be a writer and write for ages and you never get any input back until it's published or the play is produced or the poetry reading finally comes up or whatever. So that's really what drew me to it, was sort of First Amendment speech expression issues,
Well, community
artistic. you know.
Community radio has such an important place in terms of providing information from a lot of different perspectives. And, from those early days of a couple being turned away, I mean, Marty, you certainly have taken it to, new heights. You led KGNU at the helm of it for 20 years. You are very well known in the circles of community radio. Why is it such an important medium? Why is community radio something that we should invest in? Why it's important to have, especially with all of these different choices that people are bombarded with today, for getting content?
Well, in the day when I got involved in it, it was one of the few ways that normal citizens could be involved, could become the media, could have their voices, could I mean now like Liz has been on for a million years at KGNU, and it's it's something that can happen for ordinary people while they carry on the rest of their lives. Um, I, I could have gone the quote public radio way, the more professional, the paid way, the NPR way. I started early enough that I could have made progress in that field. That just wasn't of interest to me. I was
Mhm.
always wanting to know who would walk in the door and have a great idea for a program. I've always been interested in empowering people to have a voice. And I think part of it is a First Amendment kind of a feeling. Um, and the other is out of being an artist, a writer, just giving people a way to express themselves um, in a mass medium. And so that was kind of it then. Now we have, of course, we have podcasting, we have all kinds of internet options, from social media to well, everything.
To
Uh,
everything.
everything. So it isn't, it's become more of it's not as rare, the opportunity as it used to be. But that's why it was important to me. And I just thought the people were a lot more interesting in community radio than in
Well,
public.
the voices come from everywhere. And you were referencing Liz, that's Liz Lane. She is the producer of KGNU's It's the Economy. That's the actual program that this episode is airing on. And I've appreciated the opportunity to share and lift up the voices of incredible women.
I think it offers so much autonomy for people. I mean, you can really do anything on community radio, pretty much. We had a schlock fest every year for a long time.
Schlockfest.
Blockfest. We produced a weekly live soap opera called Actual Passion. That was so much fun.
That sounds racy.
It was. Oh, yeah. And now again, it was a joint collaborative thing, and we all came together, theater people and just people kind of off the street, basically. And any crazy idea you can put it into action, and you'll find that a lot of other people appreciate it as well. All the goofy stuff uh, and the political stuff that may have been way too left for some other medium, we broadcast it. And I just love that part of community radio as well.
Just given, Marty, your long tenure, 50 plus years in this space of community radio as not just a content creator, but not just a voice, but also running stations. I just love your perspective on, being a woman at the helm of many of those things that you did. Were you one of few, one of only? Is community radio a welcome space for women in terms of both having careers there, but also in terms of advancing issues as it relates to women?
Oh, I think so. Yes. I mean, I think when I was first chosen to lead KGNU, which would have been 88, 87, I think 87. Somebody told me that the board decided one of the reasons they wanted to hire me was to have a woman at the
Mhm.
helm, to give a woman a chance at the helm. I'm not sure if that was true. I don't know that. Um, and it was a bit rare when I first started. Then it became extremely common in community radio that an awful lot of general managers are now women. And you know, that's a big change. I think people saw it as a good job for a woman because it's a balance of being highly organized and um, leading in a fairly, mm, I don't want to say commanding way, but you really have to steer these organizations to an extent. And this kind of open door, giving everybody a chance. It's kind of um, a balance between the yin and the yang in an unusual management situation. People do it differently, but people choose different ways to manage, and I really like to manage collaboratively. I want to have the buck stop somewhere. You have to have a leader, you have to have a captain, but I like to hear other people's opinions. I like to get input from all sides, and I worked a lot by committee, formed a zillion committees at KGNU, and that helped us to do more ultimately. But I always felt I had to serve on every committee because
Mhm.
somebody had to be the spoke connector of
That sounds
all.
exhausting.
Well, it was in a way, but when, there's a certain point where synergy takes over. And I remember when we hosted the first Grassroots Radio Conference, that conference is still going. Uh,
Yes.
Kathy Melio and I started that in the 90s. Um, I really didn't do anything. I said, we're going to do this. KGNU is going to do this. And as if by magic, it happened. And I just kind of skated on the top of it. I really didn't have to do much. So I saw that happen over and over again at KGNU.
Well, Marty, for someone who has dedicated their career and a good, portion of your entire life to community radio, I'd love for you to just close us out with, why is it important? Why is community radio important? Why should we care? Why should we invest in it? This is the KJNU Fall Fund Drive, and I just appreciate your comments on that.
Well, it's really the last bastion of citizen input into the media. I mean, uh, except for podcasting, except for social media, it's still one of the ways to reach a lot of people in a moment. It's important for emergencies, obviously, still in all of our communities and during fires and all the climate change incidents that we're enduring. So there's that, and you can reach your community in a second, and you really don't need electricity at home. You can get it. I think it's still important that way. I think it's still a place for voices that are not mainstream, for people who do not have money to be a part of a medium, who maybe don't have the education but are brilliant on the air. It's still an opportunity for people to do that. Um, I still believe in it. I think it's still valid and important and an opportunity for a lot of people to offer this kind of expression, whether it's political content or music or uh, just talking about how we live our lives. And new ideas can bubble there. And of course, in the early days, a lot of people started in community or college radio and ended up on NPR.
Mhm.
So it's also a training ground for new voices and new talents for larger scale media. It's efficient, you know. Everyone puts a little bit in, and you can run this big operation year after year after year, as of course KGNU has done.
Well, I think that it's been fantastic, just Marty, to hear your through line in terms of why you actually got into community radio in the first place, all your years of dedicated leadership for continuing and leading the medium, bringing that leadership, that bringing together of consensus with people that you've worked with. And I've really appreciated this conversation. I've been speaking to Marty Durlin on this special episode of Inspiring Women for KGNU. And Marty, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Laurie. Thanks.
This is Inspiring Women, and I'm Laurie McGraw, and we are doing a special episode of Inspiring Women for KGNU, and we're talking to inspiring women in the area of community radio. So I am ecstatic to actually be talking to Breeze Richardson. She's the executive director of Aspen Public Radio. She has been in the area of storytelling, community radio, and the like for many years. Breeze, thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm happy to be here with you today.
Well, Breeze, why don't we just get started and tell us a bit about sort of what you do, what your job is today, and then, where it all started in community radio.
Sure. Well, I spend my days as the executive director of a small independent public radio station, Aspen Public Radio, here in the Roaring Fork Valley on the western slope of Colorado. And I also serve as the president of the Rocky Mountain Community Radio Coalition, which is a network of over 20 nonprofit radio stations, 16 of which are here in Colorado, which has been around since the 80s. Started sharing content by recording it on cassette and sending it to each other. And nowadays we have Slack and staff we've hired collectively, a state house reporter that helps us in the rural parts of the state get access to what's happening in the state house, but also a managing editor and a digital editor that helps take our story segments that might be really relevant here, but also to other communities across the Western Slope and make that content more easily shareable. It's one of the highlights of my work, and I think really brings diversity and additional viewpoints into what our listeners get here on the air every day.
Breeze, as you think about your career in this space, how long have you been in this area working in whether it's storytelling, programming, public radio? How long?
Yeah, a little over 20 years.
20 years. Okay. So a while. And you joined at a time where public radio was sort of like, not at the, I would just say, top of the heap in terms of, what was available mediums for communicating. So why did you join way back then? What was important to go into this aspect of media?
Sure. I was definitely a community activist in college and even before that. My undergraduate degrees are in American Studies, really focused on community development and how communities organize themselves. I also have a degree in economics. And I went to get my master's degree.
Well, this is the It's the Economy show, so this is perfect.
Yeah. Public policy was really what was pulling on my heartstrings. I really saw public policy, something I didn't really know what that meant in the early aughts when an advisor in the economics department recommended that I look into it, and realizing that there was an educational pathway that was connected to how communities are formed and what rules we write to govern how we'll spend money, collect money, address social services, further and advance things that make our communities successful. That's what I wanted to do. So I went to the University of Chicago to get my master's in public policy. And while I was there, for the first time, I was really living in a community. The university's on the south part of the town. I was living in the north part of the city, and public radio was keeping me company as I commuted across Chicago each day. I found it to be a place where a really diverse political landscape all found trust. And that was really important to me. So there were fellow activists who listened to WBEZ and trusted those morning programs and midday programs, especially when it came to local news. And there were also politicians and those who were, I would say, from the other side of the aisle, in my view book, that were also tuning into WBEZ and going on the shows and giving interviews. And I saw it as this place, this public square, if you will, that folks were willing to engage with. They were willing to participate as voices, and they were willing to listen as consumers. And I think the power of the human voice is just amazing. Not to knock print media and everything it does for our communities, but When you read a quote from a 5-year-old child or a 92-year-old grandmother, it's just that, it's words on a page. But when you hear that accented voice telling you that story, or you hear the wonder of that young person asking that question, I just think it's amazing. And so I went on from there to really support the infrastructure that would make public radio, community radio stations thrive. So I went to WBEZ and I was there for over a decade before I moved on and found my way to Colorado.
Well, I'd love to sort of double click and dive into a little bit, your the public square comment that you made, because I think that, we've heard that used quite literally for the social media platforms that are out there. And I think while they have been having a heyday of it, if you will, the public square aspect has not proven to be quite helpful. Actually, it's proven to be quite detrimental. So I'd love for you to just comment on sort of, I mean, I feel like it's almost service. It's public service to be in community radio. So maybe you could just talk about that importance and how perhaps it does maybe a better job of representing what people are really thinking, doing, how it influences, and perhaps is a better choice for that public square than I would say, the social media options that are out there.
Social media definitely came into being in my career in this space. And I think there are some things about it, even to this day, that are really special. I'm a contemporary quilter, and a community like that might have a dozen or so people who practice your craft in real life space. You can be connected to people around the country and across the globe that share a passion like that. Quilting's a really visual medium, and so being able to see that pattern or that stitch or that choice of fabric was really an amazing thing that social media creates. But I'd say what its strength is also its detriment. You get to choose who you listen to. And over time, now that we've had these platforms for over a decade, there really is an opportunity for you to filter and limit who you hear from. And I don't think that's the public square. I think the public square has a real multitude of voices. It's in no way a monolith. So it's incumbent upon us as producers and hosts and reporters and those of us who are in these spaces to find those diversities of viewpoints and bring them to that shared space. So that's what I think public radio and community radio does so well. Whether it's a community access model where literally anyone can have a show, come learn how to use the equipment and, share your thoughts and ideas and passions and interests. Or it can be in a more professional space. I think it's a point of pride when people say to us here at our station that they can't really tell the difference between a national morning edition story and a story that was locally produced by one of our reporters. And so I think it's all of the in between. And so it's incumbent upon us, like I said, to go make sure we're seeking out that diversity. And that's what allows us then, especially in a short format, right? A segment D in morning edition, as we call it in the business, is a little over 4.5 minutes. New research out of NPR is suggesting that listeners want more content in the mornings. So the network has made a pledge to have no more than one feature story an hour that's more than 5 minutes long. I think that really gets to the in and out nature of our daily lives and routines. So many people have radio on as they're doing other things, whether it's getting kids ready or, taking a drive somewhere. But it fluidly fitting in and out of your life means that we don't necessarily expect to hold your attention, say, for a full hour.
Well, also in just like filling the airwaves with content that matters and stories that matters. There's a power in that. So I love that description. Breeze, this is Inspiring Women, and you have been an inspiring woman in the area of community radio for 20 years. You're a leader and you're an important voice. As you think about just advice you might give to other younger women, perhaps, as to why they might pursue this as a career option, a place to put their efforts, what would you say to them?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that this weekend, we closed out our listener survey. Over 300 people every fall. We turn to that audience and ask, what are we doing right? What could we do better? What do you want more of? What do you want less of? And as I was going through those answers upon closing the survey, I just feel so grateful that individuals took the time to say what they want. And I feel it's incumbent upon me to deliver. So I see this as a space, and it's really empowering to me that it's a space that isn't taking direction from on high, isn't being driven by a profit motive of, where can we cut? We've faced some pretty significant cost increases in healthcare costs, among others, here at our station this year. And we're not going to do less work because of that. That has never even been on the table as a way to handle that challenge. Quite the opposite. It's making us think more creatively about how we can talk with philanthropists and municipalities and others who we've relied on to support the station to say, this is what our commitment is. It's driven by what the community wants. Here's where we're getting that information. And I want to be in a role that's in my community that's influencing it like that, that's crowdsourcing ideas and requests and wants and delivering on them. I think content creation is an amazing way to spend your time. No 2 days look the same. We have another good example is a very contentious ballot issue here in the Roaring Fork Valley, and nobody was really willing to stand up and convene that space. And I feel really proud as the public radio station here that we did. We turned to both sides of that debate and invited them into a shared stage with tightly moderated questions and opportunities for rebuttal. And there's been so much feedback in the last week about how helpful that was by voters who are trying to make a decision on how to vote on this contentious issue. That's the kind of thing we do in community media and public media. We create spaces for people to be heard and share their ideas. And I just think that that's so important to democracy and to the underpinnings of a community. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to have a space in which we can talk about the things.
This has been a really excellent interview, and I appreciate the opportunity to be speaking with Breeze Richardson. She is the executive director of Aspen Public Radio, a longtime leader in this space. Breeze, thank you so much. This has been an episode of Inspiring Women with Laurie McGraw. Please subscribe, rate, and review. We are produced at Executive Podcast Solutions. More episodes can be found on inspiringwomen.show. I am Laurie McGraw, and thank you for listening.